All right, welcome back. This week we're going to talk a bit about writing an introduction. We'll talk about writing in psychology in general, but we'll start with the introduction because that's where we start. Okay. So the first thing when getting started writing is to know what your message is. Know what you want to say. This requires doing some research background first and kind of charting out what your plan is before you get started. So the first thing you want to do is collect and synthesize your references. By synthesize, I mean put together the folks that are saying the same things, find the big pictures, address any outliers, put together the argument, right? What I don't want to see in your research papers is so-and-so said this, and then so-and-so said this, and then so-and-so said this, and then so-and-so said this, running me through your reference list. What I do want to see is an introduction in a paper as a whole, but an introduction particularly that is organized around ideas. The field knows this. Then folks have argued this. Some other people have found this. What my study is going to answer is this other thing, right? So organize around ideas, not around other authors, okay? So you want to support the ideas, the research that you're sharing with who has done that research, right? Give credit where it's due, but don't let the names of other people organize your intro. Instead, organize it by the main topics that someone would need to know in order to understand your research question. You meet somebody in a elevator. What do you need to tell them? What do they need to know to understand why you're doing the study you're doing, right? What are the 3 main points? Break it down, and then how are you going to support each of those? Make sense? Cool. All right. So main message. Research question, what literature in the field do you need to understand that question? Both what is the importance of that question and what do we know about it so far from previous research and from theory. Next, you want to draft. Some ways of doing this, some people really like outlines, other people like just drafting and editing. I like to get it all out there and then edit the heck out of it afterwards. Do multiple drafts. It's important to run through the way that you see the literature and then read through that and see if it still makes sense. Sometimes it makes really great sense in your head and then you put it on paper and it's not as smooth, and so you need to edit. Another way of double checking this, which is nice, is talk to somebody who's not in this class, not in this program, who may be not as familiar with the psychological concepts that you're dealing with, and then notice what kinds of questions they ask and how they ask them, like what order, because this can let you know how you need to address your audience in your paper, right? What is the first thing that they wonder about, right? So address that and then move on. Okay, as we're talking about giving credit where it's due and how we're going to write this introduction, we need to address plagiarism and citations. So plagiarism is presenting anybody else's work as your own. This can be in the form of results. This can be borrowing wording. This can be using other folks' pictures. So avoiding plagiarism is key in the field of psychology and social science in general, because we build our careers on the research that we do. So if we are borrowing other people's work, then we're essentially taking a piece of their career and owning it. So stealing in a big way, because it's not just a thing, it's a person's career. The other thing is that a way around this is just being really clear about, this is my idea, this is somebody else's. It's okay to do. There's pretty extensive punishments available in the course. The first time I'm going to look at it as learning experience. That only goes for once. After the first time, better to ask than to make that mistake. There's also a lot more info on what plagiarism is, what counts plagiarism in the APA manual, so you can check that out on your own. Okay, when we're writing an introduction, this image of the process of science is important to keep in mind, because you want to think about where your introduction fits in that larger scheme of science, right? You come up with an idea, you generate a hypothesis, design a study to test it, conduct the study, analyze data, interpret results, refine the hypothesis, produce this new knowledge, put that out there, and then somebody else is going to come up with new ideas based on that, right? So what you're doing in the introduction is walking through where the field has been in terms of this process thus far, maybe pointing out holes, problems along the way, stuff we've run into, and how your study is going to address it. Okay, you also want to keep in mind where the introduction is in the anatomy of a paper. At this point, you guys probably seen this before, the idea of a research paper as a kind of an hourglass, starting broad, narrowing down to what your question is and what your study did, and then going back out to implications more broadly in the discussion. So the introduction, we're starting broad. Why do we care? What's going on? You don't want any abbreviations right off the bat, because we gotta get people oriented to what's going on. So again, this introduction, we want to give a title, we want to introduce the problem, review and synthesize the literature, and the point of all of this is leading up to the rationale for your study. Why should we care? Why should we need to answer this particular study question? Then you give your research questions and your hypotheses. The hypotheses are what exactly you're going to test, what the data is going to look like for your study that deals with this bigger question. Okay, so again, outline the problem investigated to talk about past research and theory, and then present formal hypotheses and how they connect to past research. We introduce the topic, concise review, and then research questions. So again, we're kind of still in the introduction, narrowing down from big topic to what you're doing. So in the next few slides, I'm going to give you an example of observational research study so that you know what this might look like. So my introduction is this. The background for this, a few studies of cultural variation and attention management indicate that in Mesoamerican communities with indigenous heritage, children tend to emphasize learning by observation on ongoing events and simultaneous attention to multiple focuses. This is more emphasized in these Mesoamerican communities than it is in European American communities, where children are often in school and they're taught in schools to attend to one thing at a time. So simultaneous attention to multiple foci versus attending to one thing at a time. My research question here is, do kids from communities with indigenous heritage simultaneously attend to multiple ongoing events in this origami situation that's depicted here? Do they do this more often than kids from communities where there's been a lot of schooling across multiple generations?